Welcome, everybody, to the Real News Network. I'm Mark Steiner. Good to have you with us. Stephen Miller is a leading policy advisor to Donald Trump. He may also be the direct link between the White House and the white nationalist movement in this country. The Southern Poverty Law Center's Hate Watch reviewed over 900 emails between Miller and the editors of the right-wing news organization Breitbart. They were leaked by their former editor, Katie McHugh, who they fired. So I guess you have to be aware of who you fire. In those emails, he pushed a white nationalist agenda, setting up camps that separate children from families, banning Muslims from certain countries, setting arrest quotas for the undocumented in our country, and more. Now, the white nationalist influence, if not control of the White House, may be much more real than we admit, and we'll explore some of that. We're joined by Michael Edison Hayden, who is senior investigative reporter for the Southern Poverty Law Center's Hate Watch. In addition to investigating the Stephen Miller emails, he exposed the identity of a white nationalist organizer working within the State Department in August and published a guide to open source intelligence reporting for Columbia University's Toast Center in June. And Jared Holt joins us. He's an investigative reporter with Right Wing Watch. He wrote an article on this investigation called Leaked Information Reveals the Extent of Stephen Miller's Extremism and the Grand Old Party's Moral Rot. Right Wing Watch is part of the advocacy group People for the American Way, and he specializes there in researching and reporting extremist right-wing movements in our country. And good to have you both with us. So, welcome. So let me start, Michael, with you and the background to this, and just very quickly, how this began. And so did I say it was true, right? That the woman who he initially had the email conversations with at Breitbart, Stephen Miller, the woman he talked with, quit, or was fired, I should say, and leaked these emails to you all. Is that right?
There was a significant amount of time between when McHugh was let go by Breitbart and when I received the emails. She was let go in the spring of 2017 after publishing some tweets that were widely perceived to be Islamophobic. And McHugh went into a period of self-examination, I guess is what she would, it's the way she portrayed it to me. And she passed along emails to me in June of this year. And I was pretty shocked about what I saw.
So, I mean, I'm just very curious before we turn to Jared here for a moment. I mean, when you said you were shocked, I mean, talk a bit about when you first received these emails, you saw this unfolding. So what do you mean shocked? Shocked how?
Well, I mean, my main focus is not to cover the administration. My main focus is to cover, white nationalism, to cover the neo-Nazi movement, particularly the online sectors of extremism. That's where my background lies. And, I didn't go into it saying like, oh, I'm going to do something about Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is, is a white nationalist or anything like that. I was handed this material. The first thing I was shown was that he shared a link to a white nationalist website. And so, does that interest you? And I said, yes, it does, because this is very familiar to me. And when I began to look at it, there's a level of shock in seeing patterns that were very familiar to me, having covered extremists who are the type of extremists that, we are not welcome to have a voice almost in polite society. I mean, people who are, frequently suspended from social media and things like that. To see those type of patterns of language being used by somebody who is widely regarded to be, the most influential advisor the president has.
So, Jared, how shocked were you by this when you first read it? What was your take?
My take is that we've known Stephen Miller has had past interactions with this movement before. He's had, he certainly advocated for policies that many people would perceive to be racist and unfair to immigrants trying to enter this country. But what Michael's reporting showed was him in his own words, and I think that carries a lot of weight on itself. It's one of those situations where you could listen to experts, you could listen to people making allegations, or you could just see him in his own words expressing what he believes. And I think that is crucial reporting that Michael was able to bring to the public's attention.
So, all right, let's get to the heart of what happened to some of these. There's just one email I want to pull out here from the report that I read from the Southern Poverty Law. And I understand, just to be clear, Michael, there are other reports, as you alluded to in the article at the end. There's more coming out. So this is just the beginning, and we will be covering this with some intensity here. So in this one email, Breitbart is saying that they are going to do a series of stories on non-white SAT scores to break it down. Neil says it's easier for people to digest it that way and change their minds. Miller writes back, on the education angle, question mark, makes sense. Also, you see the Pope saying West must, in effect, get rid of borders. Someone should point out the parallels to the camp of the saints. Let me stop there for a moment. So when I read that line in your article, Michael, first of all, let's talk about who the camp of the saints, what this book was. And there's more about this as it's unfolding as I read the other emails. I mean, this is not like some sci-fi novel that we all love to read. This is a book that was a cornerstone of some of the most right-wing racist movements in Europe.
Yeah, this book is, you know, from my perspective, you put this thing on your, you know, on your bookshelf, you're generally making a statement. Either you're an extremism reporter, or more often than not, you're an extremist.
Right.
It's not the type of thing that you know, you see people reading in public, you know, on public transit or whatever. The book is scathingly racist and dehumanizes non-whites in a way that is truly grotesque. There is an Indian character, and he sort of leads a flotilla of refugees into France, and he's called the Turd Eater, and he eats literal human feces. And basically he and the rest of these brown-skinned refugees come into France, and when they get there, they overtake the population gradually. You know, there's a part in the book where a white woman is raped to death, basically, by refugees. The refugees are depicted as inherently savage and subhuman. And, you know, it's dystopian in the same way that the 1987 film RoboCop is dystopian. But, you know, the message of that is one about, you know, public works being privatized. This is a message that refugees are, you know, or people from the developing world are going to come here and completely destroy your, you know, destroy your country, destroy what you perceive to be your homeland. And it's not surprising that it was immediately picked up by white nationalists. You can't, I mean, the publisher who issues the book in the United States is a white nationalist publisher who we list, you know, a hate watch list in that respect on our website.
So pick up on that, Jared. I mean, when you look at something like Stephen Miller, who is clearly creating some of the most significant policies around immigration and more in our country, and is at the right hand of Donald Trump, and this is the background. So talk a bit about what you think, how deep this goes, and what that means.
Well, as far as the camp of the saints thing goes, I have seen some pushback from people who would like to defend Miller. They've said, you know, it's not a crime to read a book, but I think that sort of misses the point here. What Stephen Miller was doing was indicating that he was familiar with the contents of the book and then suggesting a right-wing publisher to further the contents of that book to a right-wing audience under the guise of some sort of political analysis. So that is indicative to me of a pattern that represents what is likely Stephen Miller's agenda, which is to be a part of the Republican movement under Trump and to usher in policies that are adjacent, in the very least, to the goals of white nationalism.
Well, I mean, both of you kind of, let's wrestle with this one question for a moment. I mean, the racism and anti-Semitism run very deep in our world. And racism in this country is one of our greatest social diseases. And most everybody is infected by it at some level. So we're not talking about somebody who may have some racist ideas who works in the government. We're talking here, Michael, about people who are part of a white nationalist movement, who are virulent racist, who live by their racism, and that they're at the heart of the White House here. This is not just, this is a pretty frightening scenario. I mean, this is different than having a conservative or a liberal deciding what policy is. We're talking about people who, for want of a better term, in the old days might have been called a fascist at the top.
Yeah, I think the best way to frame this, the best way to look at it, in my opinion, is to understand that, like, yeah, there's garden variety racism. There's like the stereotype of like your uncle or whatever at the Thanksgiving table, this sort of thing, right? That people bat around. And then there's a difference between organized racism and trying to organize society around racist ideas, and that's a huge difference. It makes a huge difference to us because we don't, police, we're not interested in policing people based upon the fact that they use slurs. We are interested in people who want to restructure society and have ambitions to restructure society in broad ways. And then if you look at some of the policies that the Trump administration has enacted, I'll give you one example here. In the emails, there's the one where he shares a link to VDARE, which is a white nationalist website. They sort of, support the sort of white genocide myth, this idea that whites are being systematically eliminated or whatever. He shares that in the context of temporary protective status for refugees. He's like, here, read this. And to a very young reporter who is only 10 months out of college, he says, read this. Why don't you read this as your guide? And I think that says volumes about our changing policies around temporary protective status, because the United States has removed the ability to protect refugees from, after natural disasters, from a number of, countries that are predominantly non-white. And, in doing that, you can see a connection between Miller sharing this email, this is my reference point, and then here we are, and the President of the United States and the people around him are acting on it.
And I'm not one who tries to be an alarmist all the time and try to look at things kind of objectively and analytically. But Jared, when you heard what Michael just said, and you look at this one quote that came out of the Southern Poverty Law Center, which was when they talked to Katie McHugh, the woman who released these emails, who was the editor of Breitbart before. And the quote was, what Stephen Miller sent to me in those emails has become policy at the Trump administration, which is what Michael was just describing here. But I mean, this is, I think, politically, when you look at what could be unfolding here, this is where the danger lives. Go ahead.
I totally agree. I mean, in 2016, when the alt-right, as it would come to be known, essentially a reboot of the white nationalist movement, was gaining foothold in the United States and galvanizing around Trump's campaign, the biggest hope that they had was that one day they would have government officials, people at the highest levels, that read their podcasts, that read their blogs, that thought the way that they do. And these emails from around that era of the alt-right indicate that Stephen Miller was one of those people. And now Stephen Miller is one of the most, probably, if not the most, influential policy voice in the Trump White House. And that is reason for huge alarm, in my opinion.
I mean, if you look at what Miller is doing, I mean, he's playing this very close to the vest. He's really very shrewd and smart, and cutting off all the contact with so many people who was afraid to be exposed. He might have to make phone calls and write anything that will be, again, he doesn't want to be exposed. So I mean, unearthing this, I wonder, has there been any reaction yet to your report, Michael, from the White House, from any folks in the Republican Party around this?
Well, they dismissed the report outright in a statement and said that they were, they just attacked Southern Poverty Law Center, as I expected they would. They were going to attack their credibility. Somebody from the White House apparently insinuated to an Axios reporter that this was an anti-Semitic attack because Miller himself is Jewish, which I think is going to be a very difficult case to make given the reporting that I have done about on overt neo-Nazis who, have ambitions of killing Jews. I think that they don't, it's just from what I've seen, they don't really have an answer to it other than to attack the source. And, I kind of expected that. I figured they would attack. Honestly, I thought the attacks would be a lot more aggressive than they have been. I thought they did a lot more attacks on my character, and things like that. I think that there's just no way for them to claim that the emails are not real. They're real. He sent them.
Exactly, and I'm sure the attacks will become more forceful in the coming week. But as we can conclude here, I mean, one of the things, Jared, that you wrote in the end of your article, you wrote, your quote was that a figure like Miller could rise in the ranks of the GOP and be normalized in the American press is indicative of the moral rot of the Republican Party and a failure of the nation's largest mass media networks to address Miller as what he is, a white nationalist at the heart of power in a GOP administration. Well, let me just ask you both to wrestle with that comment and let you start since you wrote that, Jared. I mean, we've talked about this on the air before. I mean, this is that there is the number of people who are virulently racist and part of this nationalist movement are in the White House. They're in the executive branch. This would be how deep does it go? How worried should America be about what we're looking at, or are we being overly concerned?
Well, I think the point of history that we're in right now is the result of a system that has ultimately faulted. I do not think that this is indicative of a healthy functioning democracy. That figures like Miller, that figures like Trump himself even, can rise to the level of powers they have and receive institutional support from the mainline GOP and also from a institutionalized press that pretends that this is just another side of a normal political debate. 'Cause what we're fighting for ultimately is our political future for the next set of decades. And, I do think that it's interesting to see if mainstream media, if our major networks are going to wrestle with this story and treat it as seriously as I believe it is.
I think it's a very serious story to wrestle with. Michael, how do you respond to that?
I mean, I agree with what Jared's saying. The only thing I would add about this is it seems that Miller has gotten a tremendous amount of cover from the fact that Steve Bannon was removed, and people, I think, began to turn away from the possibility that the extreme far right was influencing Trump in some way just because Bannon went. And then Miller was always this character who was like lurking in the background. And then every time he would show up on Fox and whatever else, it would come up again. People would be like, oh, there's Stephen Miller again in the back of their heads. But, if you remember what happened with Steve Bannon, I know Southern Poverty Law Center launched a petition, for example. Other people did to attract attention to his beliefs and things like that. And then it wasn't until after Charlottesville, it was 1 week after Charlottesville, that Bannon was, resigned from his post and did so, just went quietly into the night. It would be a shame if we have to wait, for a similar Charlottesville-like event or a mass shooting for them to respond by removing Miller. And he's really gotten away with, being there for years, whereas Bannon was removed relatively quickly.
And as I said before, Miller plays it very smart. He's not like Bannon. He doesn't kind of come out and he's not vociferous like Bannon. He's not a media hog like Bannon.
Well, I will add one detail that I think is important to add about that. We have Bannon talking about Camp of the Saints, which is what was, I think, the big scandal, which sort of unearthed sort of like, wow, what does he really believe? And the first time, I think, publicly that Bannon ever mentioned Camp of the Saints was in October of 2015. And the reason why that is very significant is because the first time that Miller mentions Camp of the Saints in his emails is 1 month prior to that. And then Julia Hahn writes a story that adheres very similarly to the pitch that Miller was making to Katie McHugh. Julia Hahn works in the White House as an aide, by the way, now. And then a few days later, Bannon mentions Camp of the Saints in a radio interview with Jeff Sessions, who's Miller's boss. So if Camp of the Saints was too toxic for Bannon, where did Bannon start talking about it? And we have another thing about Camp of the Saints as well, which is that prior to Miller mentioning it, on VDARE, a white nationalist website, they had a literal story tag, Camp of the Saints. So like anything that was about refugees was tagged, or not anything, but most of the things were tagged with Camp of the Saints on it. So, I mean, you just see a pathway directly, and Daily Stormer, which is a neo-Nazi website, was writing on Camp of the Saints. So you have this pathway from, this sort of white nationalist, these white nationalist hate sites directly to Sessions' office and to Breitbart. Then it gets a megaphone to the entire country. And next thing you know, Miller, Bannon, and Julia Hahn, they're all in the White House.
And on that note, we'll stop and contemplate all that. And in the coming week, as more comes out, we look forward to having you both back and talk about this in some depth as this unfolds. It's really important work you're doing, Michael Edison Hayden. We appreciate the work that you're putting out there. And Jared Holt, your investigative work, Right Wing Watch, is also incredible, and it's good to have this out there. We need to be able to wrestle with this in an honest way to see what we're facing. Gentlemen, thank you so much for both joining us, and look forward to talking more as this unfolds.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks for having us.
And I'm Mark Steiner here for the Real News Network. We will stay on top of this. Let us know what you think. Take care.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. Hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.